All right, what is up, PT on Ice Daily crew? Got Instagram over here, we got YouTube over here. I'm Dr. Mark Gallant, lead faculty for the ICE Extremity Management Division, alongside Dr. Lindsay Huey and Dr. Eric Chacones. Pumped to be coming at you here, Clinical Tuesday. Before we dive into talking a little bit more about tendons, what I want to bring our attention to a couple open ice extremity management courses coming up. So April 1st, Lindsay is going to be in Nightingale, North Carolina. So that is just outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. So wonderful town to go visit. Lindsay's going to put on a great show. So if you've been wanting to jump into extremity management and you're in the Southeast, that's a great place to go see it. My next open course that's not sold out is going to be in Hendersonville, Tennessee. So myself and the Onward Tennessee crew would love to have you come and hang out right next to Nashville. So if you want to pop in and check out some music and then head up for the course, be a great time. What I want to talk about today is I've been thinking a lot recently about tendinopathies and guitar amps and managing the knobs on a guitar amp to create the perfect tone, and how we're doing a similar thing when it comes to our tendinopathies. We're wiggling a bunch of knobs to try to create the perfect outcome for our client or the person in front of us. So when we're looking at our guitar amp or our knobs for tendinopathy, we're going to have four knobs. We're going to have a volume knob, a load knob, a compression knob, and a speed knob. And we need to be constantly manipulating these four knobs to create the perfect outcome for our clients. So very similar to a guitar amp, the volume knob is going to be the first knob that we manipulate. And the reason for this is the volume knob is going to impact all of the other knobs on our amp. So when we've got a guitar player or a bass player, any instrument using a volume knob, if the volume is too low, all of the other knobs, we're not going to really see the impact of them because the overall volume is so low. We can't tell the compression, the gain. It's not going to impact our overall tone because the volume is so low to hear it. Similar with tendinopathy, if the volume of exercise is so low, we're going to have no impact on the tendon. So how much load, how much compression, how much speed we're putting in is not going to be significant because that overall volume is so low. On the flip side of that, if you have a guitar amp and you crank the volume all the way to an 11, you're often not going to hear all the crispness of the load, the gain, the compression, all these nice intricate articulations that you can get from a good guitar amp. Because the volume is so high, it's going to create a distortion effect in the amp, making everything else relatively useless. Same with our tendinopathies. If the volume is so absolutely high, we're going to impact the tendon in such a way that it's often going to flare up. It won't matter how much speed, how much compression, how much tensile load we're putting in, because the overall volume of exercise is impacting the tendon so significantly, we're unable to dial in any of the nuance. So again, for both guitar amps and tendons, the volume is going to be our first knob that we really want to dial in. Too low a volume, we're not going to see the impact of any of the other knobs. If we have too much volume, it's going to be so overwhelming to the tissue that we aren't going to be able to create the nuance with the other knobs. Moving on to load. So tensile load is the next knob we're going to look at. Often it's the easiest knob to manipulate in tendinopathies, and it's easy often because it's easy for the patient to see the progress and where they're at. If we have 1 pound weight that we're doing our wrist extensions or our sideline external rotations with, and then at a constant speed. So often using a metronome can be helpful. So we've got 60 beats per minute. That person's doing wrist extension, sideline rotation, their heel raises, whatever the exercise may be. And they have 1 pound of tensile load. And then at the same constant speed, 2 months later, they're now able to handle 15 pounds. We can very clearly see that tensile load changing, and that we can see the tensile load changing, and that the tissue is able to handle that increase in load. That's going to be our load knob. Again, metronome will help you keep it at a constant speed. This is often the first place we're going to go in our rehab because it's easy for the patient to see. It's a simple knob to dial. The next knob that we're going to look at is compression. How is the tendon able to handle compression against the adjacent bone? So for our Achilles tendon, going into increased dorsiflexion is going to increase compression. For our posterior rotator cuff, horizontal adduction, pronation, and extension around the elbow will increase compression. What we see with a lot of tendinopathies is they have a challenging time handling compression. So oftentimes we want to turn that knob down early on in our rehab. So we want to get those tissues into ranges of motion that there's less compression so that they can start to learn to handle tensile load without compression added in, and then turning the compression knob up as we go. Oh, a lot has been mentioned about isometrics in tendinopathy research over the years. We have a few articles that have shown that isometrics are not the panacea that we were hoping for when Ebony Rio released her article in 2015. What we believe is that a lot of these articles that have not shown great results when it comes to isometrics, the problem is actually they have not manipulated compression. So if you do an isometric at end range dorsiflexion or at end range pronation and wrist extension, it may be too much compression for that tendon to handle. And therefore, you're not going to get the wonderful results that putting that tendon in a more open packed or less compressed position will show those benefits. So we've got volume overall. We've got our tensile load knob. We've got our compression knob that we're going to manipulate. And the final knob is our speed knob. Tendons are going to handle loads at greater speeds differently. So going back to physics, force equals mass times acceleration. If we've got that constant tensile load or the mass, the tendon is going to handle the acceleration differently. So in the research, this shows up a lot as body weights per second. So when we look at a leg press for the patellar tendon versus landing from a jump, they are relatively equal when it comes to pure tensile load. Where they start to vary dramatically is body weights per second. When you have that leg press, the body weights per second is actually going to decrease oftentimes because that rep is going to take longer than a second to complete. Whereas landing from a stop jump, that tendon is going to be loaded at 93 body weights per second, so exponentially higher than the leg press. That acceleration increases the force dramatically. So we have our speed knob that we want to dial in, where we're gonna progress speed with a lot of intention over the course of a rehab plan. One of the best ways that we've seen in the research is using a metronome to do this. It's very clear for the patient. I could do 45 beats per minute week 1. Week 3, I could do 60 beats per minute, then progressing to 90 beats per minute. If you're in the CrossFit space, I was starting out with slow single unders, then progressing to double unders. You can use your box jumps the same way, but being very intentional about the speed. So again, our 4 knobs, we've got the volume, which is going to impact everything else. So we have to make sure that one's dialed in. Then we have our tensile load, then we have our compression, and then we have our speed. Where it gets fun now, as you're rehabbing individuals, this is where the twisting of the knobs has to come in. So you've got some tensile load, you've got the volume dialed in. Now the person's doing well. You've decided, okay, we need to progress them into greater ranges of motion, which is going to increase the compression. So as you're starting to increase that compression knob, it's important that you do one of two things. Either you're going to maintain the volume and the load the same. Everything else stays the same, speed, volume, load, and you turn that compression knob up and see how that changes the individual symptoms. Or you may find that as you're wanting to increase that compression, you now may need to turn the overall volume or the tensile load knobs down slightly for them to be able to handle that compression more. Same with speed. As we're going to introduce greater speed, oftentimes either the volume, the load, or the compression need to stay static so we can see what the speed changes. Or we need to slightly turn those down if we decided this person's functional activity or their sports performance It really depends on speed more than anything else. So we're going to turn the load, the volume, and the compression down so that we can progress their speed as quickly and as effectively as possible. So again, to recap, volume knob is going to create the greatest impact. If the volume's too low, we're not going to be able to see the benefits of load, compression, and speed. If the volume is too high, everything's going to be distorted like a guitar amp, and the load, compression, and speed, we're not going to be able to nuance them because the volume is just so dramatically high. It's going to be challenging to impact. Tensile load knob, often the easiest for the patient to see and the easiest for us to manipulate. Then we have compression. What range of motion is that tissue able to handle load through? So again, oftentimes end range dorsiflexion, end range horizontal adduction are going to be challenging for the Achilles and the posterior cuff. And then what's the speed like? Force equals mass times acceleration. If we change the speed dramatically, if we change that acceleration, it's significantly more force going through that tendon. We want to progress that as systematically as we do our tensile load or our overall volume. Hope this helps. Pumped to see you all out on the road. Definitely catch either Lindsay in Nightendale, North Carolina, just outside of Raleigh, or myself, Hendersonville, Tennessee, right outside of Nashville. Drop some comments in the discussion. Would love to hear what you think about manipulating compression, load, speed, and overall volume when it comes to tendinopathies. Have a great rest of your week.